Urban explorers, what place truly terrified you? I went to an abandoned hospital. There was a large square staircase spiraling up to the roof on the outside of the building. The steel door at the bottom was locked, so the only way up was to climb the outside up to the first landing. My buddy boosted me up, I climbed over, and there was a sleeping bag with a steak knife next to it on the landing. I called down, we're definitely not alone here, dude. No, but it's cool, said a voice behind me, scaring the shit out of me and making me jump and whirl around. There was a young, dirty, homeless-looking guy standing there, coming down the stairs from above, hands up, palms out. Didn't mean to scare you. He sat down on the stairs, so I carefully stepped on the handle of the steak knife, leaned over the edge, and pulled my friend up. We had planned to sit on the roof and drink some beers, so we offered the homeless guy one, which he gratefully accepted, and we hung out on the landing for a while. We talked about the city, the cops, traveling, life in general. He was basically a drifter, had been in town for about a week or so, but seemed like a nice guy. Things were going pretty well until he asked, "You guys are human, right? I fucking hate it when I meet people who end up being aliens. You never know until you peel their skin off. They've been after me a long time, you know. They don't stop, they never stop. Sometimes I think I should just kill everyone to be safe." He was definitely not joking. There was this uncomfortable silence as my friend and I realized this guy was completely unhinged. "Yeah, man," I said, "we're human. We just wanted to check out the place and drink some beer. We're gonna move on now, we definitely don't want any trouble." He just stared at us in silence, so we left him the last beer, carefully backed up to the railing, jumped down, and walked away very quickly, constantly looking back over our shoulders. The entire time, he just stood there, still and silent, watching us leave. That place is still abandoned, 5 years later, and we've never been back. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but humans can be deceptive and dangerous in ways you never see coming.
If you're enjoying this, subscribe. Next one.
A group of my friends and I explored an abandoned asylum/mental hospital a couple of years ago in the OKC metro. Not the safest thing to do at night for silly college freshmen like ourselves. The first experience we had was just us taking our time, enjoying the darkness, and generally screwing around. You had to get in through a broken window, and we were all gathered there, being dumb, when we suddenly heard loud, echoing footsteps running toward us down the hall. We all gave each other that "who the heck isn't here? Who's messing with us?" look, and after realizing we were all present, and none of us were sprinting down a dark abandoned hallway, we bolted out of there. The second time we went, we could hear a group of people messing with us, jumping out from around corners and such, but they never got too close. At first, we assumed it was an animal, but we got braver and eventually realized it was a person. We managed to catch them, and after staring at a collection of seemingly drugged-up 20-somethings, who begged us for cans of paint and cigarettes, we finally got the not-so-good vibes and decided to leave. Then the leader of this creepy little group asked if we had any jewelry, which we quickly denied. That's when he said the creepiest thing I've ever heard in my life: "I like jewelry. I take it off the girls here when they sleep."
Next one.
I was exploring the abandoned Star Labs artillery complex, might not be the real name, which had been owned by Dr. Bull, a real military scientist who was assassinated by Mossad for trying to build Saddam Hussein's supergun. I was in an underground tunnel when my flashlight battery died. I couldn't find my extra batteries, so I pulled out a road flare instead of a chem light. Honestly, I just kind of wanted to set it off. I lit it up and inhaled a lungful of the smoke they put out. My lungs immediately started to burn, along with my eyes, and for a split second I thought I was going to die or go blind. It hurt that much. Luckily, I was near a deep shaft with water and managed to toss the flare in there. Years earlier, when I was in high school, I, stupidly, tried to climb down a rope from a storm drain into another spillway, a big square room where several large drains opened up. Somehow I slipped, let go of the rope for a split second, then caught it again and slid a few feet holding on with just one hand. I ended up with second-degree burns on that hand. To this day, I don't know how it didn't get infected. The skin was ripped and torn, and I never went to see a doctor. Hollywood got it wrong. You can't walk around in an enclosed space with a road flare. And you can't climb down a regular rope with your bare hands.
Next one.
A long time ago, I went exploring with two friends and we ventured into the subterranean levels beneath a mid-sized city in northeast Ohio. To get there, you had to sneak into a parking garage that went 9 levels below ground and walk all the way to the bottom before reaching a massive series of tunnels, maintenance corridors, and storm drains beneath the city. We were deep into it when, out of nowhere, 2 sketchy-looking guys appeared. They started talking to us, then grabbed my friend and pulled out a knife. Their aim was to rob us, but we were just teenagers and didn't have anything except our skateboards. The 2 of us who weren't being held froze, but my friend swung his skateboard at the guy and hit him in the head. That gave us a chance. We took off running, with these guys chasing us through the underground maze. When we finally made it back to the parking garage, we all split up and ran different ways. I sprinted to the nearest door I could find on the 9th level. It turned out to be a maintenance store with a stairwell leading back up to the street. I booked it up 9 stories, threw open the exit, and had to climb one more set of stairs that led to a courtyard between a few buildings. I hid in some bushes and waited. No one followed me. When I tried to go back down through the stairwell, I realized the door was exit only. I couldn't get back inside. So I circled back up and walked around to the front entrance of the garage, where I waited. Eventually, both of my friends came out through the main entrance, and we all headed to my car and left. We went back down there several more times over the years, but we never saw those 2 guys again. Getting a knife pulled on you when you're that far from anyone who could possibly help is terrifying. I'm just glad we had our skateboards.
Next one.
There used to be an abandoned psychiatric hospital in Kalamazoo, Michigan that my friends and I would explore on weekend nights back in 2003. It was 4 floors plus a basement, which included a morgue, and we explored every nook and cranny of that place. Judging by the most recent magazines in the 4th floor waiting room, it seemed to have closed around 1990. The institution had just up and left everything behind: Chernobyl style, furniture, equipment, drugs, patient files. We even found some suicide reports. By 2003, the place had been broken into and trashed by vandals, while the building itself was decaying. It looked worse than the hospitals in the Silent Hill games, but that wasn't even the creepiest or most mysterious part. One time, I entered a room and saw a mirror that wasn't broken. Everything else in this entire building had been destroyed, except this one pristine mirror still mounted on the wall. I've never seen anything more out of place, and I still get chills just thinking about it.
Next one.
We were kids exploring an underground flood channel. There were spots where we could climb up and dangle our arms out of the storm drains on the street, but that required crawling up weird diagonal tunnels. There were 4 of us, maybe 12 years old, and we only had one flashlight. The walls were covered in graffiti, lots of gang stuff and even warnings to turn back. We just assumed it was other kids who were bored and messing around. Eventually, we got to a spot where the ceiling angled down so low that the opening was small enough we had to crawl to continue. Challenge accepted. It looked like it opened up again shortly ahead, so we pushed through. We crawled about 5 or 6 feet through the low area, and when it opened back up, we found ourselves in a large round concrete pipe. Before that, it had been square or rectangular. Still lots of graffiti. We started yelling and playing with the echoes, until we thought we heard something. We got quiet. Then, out of the darkness, came a loud voice echoing, "You're going to fucking die." The kid with the flashlight took off running so fast, leaving the rest of us in absolute darkness. That was the first, and the last, time we ever went past that low spot. None of us died that day, obviously. The rest of us just quietly and slowly walked back out in the dark.
Next one.
I had one creepy experience I already mentioned, but my friends, who always go exploring, told me about another time. They were following a trail that led into the hills, and after almost reaching the freeway, they ended up near an old, closed-up train tunnel. They managed to squeeze through some loose fencing, and after wandering inside with nothing of interest, they eventually came across a bunch of shipping containers. When they glanced inside, they saw a ton of guns and ammo in one, and just a shitload of heavy boxes in the others. After a few minutes of looking around, they heard voices further down the tunnel getting closer, so they got out of there. They also mentioned it almost smelled like the ocean toward the end, so the tunnel might have led out near the beach. Edit/update, some clarification for those who asked. The place they hiked to was somewhere between Santa Barbara and Oxnard in California. They had stopped on the 101 heading southbound, started their hike, and ended up returning to the car and going to Oxnard at the end of the day. They reported it to the police, but I haven't heard of anything coming from it on the news or otherwise. Some people suggested it might have been smugglers, but given that the crates were unlocked, the tunnel was unguarded, and it was accessible to anyone who happened to wander out there, I doubt that's the case. If it was, then they were either just about to take off, or they were really stupid.
Next one.
Last winter, I went into an abandoned parking garage beneath a closed shopping mall. It had 2 levels. The upper level had a bit of sunlight coming in through the windows, but the lower level was pitch black. I made my way down the wide ramp that cars once used and decided to check out the bottom level. After switching on my flashlight, I noticed the space was massive, much bigger than the upper level. I remember how the light danced between the many supporting pillars and cast vivid shadows. I called out, "Hello," and I'm just taking a look around, just to make my intentions clear, but was met with silence. I walked around for a bit but didn't see anything of interest, just junk, some old empty bottles, nothing that suggested anyone was living there or hanging around. The place seemed completely abandoned. Still, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that someone might be hiding in the pitch-black shadows of one of those pillars. Eventually, it got the better of me and I climbed back up the ramp. I left by a different route, passing under an overhead opening where snow had fallen through. Just as I was about to hop the fence and leave, I noticed that the patch of snow had footprints in it. Logically, the explanation was probably that some poor guy had taken shelter from the cold inside the lot. But even with that in mind, being there in that moment creeped the hell out of me.
Next one.
There was an abandoned hotel I decided to check out. I got in through a blown-out window near the indoor pool. The place reeked of death. Turned out there were a couple of bloated dead deer floating in the slime that had collected at the deep end of the pool. That probably should have been my sign to leave. I made my way into the lobby and banquet areas, where I came across a couple of raccoons and squirrels that quickly scattered. Everything was destroyed. The reception desk was literally ripped in half. There was nothing worth photographing, just trash. Neat little piles of trash everywhere. After a bit of searching, I found the stairwell. There was an odd noise coming from above that I brushed off as rain. I decided to skip a couple of floors, assuming they'd be in the same condition as the lobby, especially since a lot of the exterior windows had been blown out. When I got to the 4th floor, I opened the door, not worried about noise since I was confident I was the only sober person in the building, if not the only person at all. But the second I pulled the door open, the rain sound stopped completely. I pointed my flashlight down the hallway and saw hundreds of geese poking their heads out of the guest rooms. For a few seconds, none of us moved, we just stared at each other. It felt like minutes, though it was probably only 10 seconds. There I was, standing in the middle of the hallway, facing down what I can only describe as the geese of abandoned luxury. Once the initial shock wore off, I realized I was only looking at half the floor. Behind me, the geese weren't frozen, they were coming toward me. Time to go. I shut the stairwell door behind me, which only muffled the cacophony that erupted as soon as I moved. As I hustled down the stairs, it hit me, the signs were there the whole time, goose shit everywhere. I reached the lobby and turned toward the pool, where another group of geese had gathered, almost like they were trying to trap me. Luckily, they were just dumb birds. I managed to get out, only to find the exterior of the hotel swarming with them. On the roof, one lone sentinel goose stood, honking out a shrill command, announcing that the perimeter had been breached.
Next one.
My scariest experience wasn't actually what you'd expect. In some woods not far from my house, there used to be an old hospital. And when I say old, I mean it had been shut down for decades. I'm not sure, but I think it was knocked down around 2006, leaving behind a desolate patch of grassland that I always assumed was empty. One day in late summer, my neighbor, a few friends from school, and I decided to slip through the gate and explore the area. We didn't expect much, so all we brought were our phones and a football, soccer ball, to kick around once we got bored. I remember walking down a small street just behind my house to get to the fence. It was rusted, still holding a faded "Do Not Trespass, Hospital Ground" sign. To our surprise, some wooden planks were broken near the fence, leaving a hole we could walk through. We filed in and walked up a small hill toward the main area. Since the spot was surrounded by buildings, we knew we were pretty visible, so we hid behind some brush to look around. There wasn't much of interest, just a rusted, broken down car to our left and a large wall at the back of the lot. The one thing that stood out was a huge sewage tunnel built into the wall, sealed with a massive metal cover. After exploring for a while, we spread out across the lot. My neighbor stuck with me since he didn't know the others, and together we checked out the sewage hatch. It was held shut by an old, janky lock, so I gave up on it and kept looking around. Near the wall, we found an abandoned shopping cart, a fire pit, piles of beer bottles, and even a blanket laid out on the ground. We figured it was either a hangout spot for local teens or maybe someone had been staying there. We kicked the ball around for a while, then got bored and left. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that sewer pipe. I tried convincing my neighbor to come back with me, and eventually, a few weeks later, he did. The lock was badly rusted, basically held together by corrosion. After about 10 minutes of fiddling with it, it wouldn't budge. Then my neighbor yanked on it, and it suddenly popped off into his hand. The lock had a keyhole in the center instead of the bottom corner like modern ones. To this day, I think it must have been hanging there for decades. I even snapped a picture of it. We finally pried the hatch open. The smell was awful, and it was too heavy to lift all the way, but I remember seeing something dead inside. It was a squirrel, nothing but a carcass of bones. It looked like it had gotten trapped in there decades ago. We quickly closed it and got the hell out. Over the next year, my curiosity got the better of me. I brought 2 newer friends back to the site. The hatch was mostly untouched, though people had scratched their names and little doodles into it. We opened it just enough to shine a flashlight inside, and I confirmed that the skeleton was indeed a squirrel. But what was strange was that the interior didn't look like a sewer at all. It was metal, more like a vent shaft, and there was no water. It wasn't big, but you could stand up inside if you crouched a little, and there was graffiti on the walls. One of my friends, the bolder one, decided to go in with the flashlight. My other friend and I tried to stop him, but he grabbed the torch out of my hand and crawled inside. I held the hatch open while he walked deeper into the shaft. I waited for a few minutes, then suddenly I heard him running back. As he got closer, I could swear I heard not only his footsteps, but another set echoing behind him. He dove out of the hatch, and we slammed it shut before sprinting out of there. I never went back. I think I was probably just hearing things, and I never asked him about it. Maybe he just got freaked out and ran. But to this day, I'm not entirely sure.
Next one.
When I was a kid, I lived just down the road from what used to be a small museum. It was on the side of a large university that we used to explore almost daily. One day, we noticed a man going into the museum. It was the only building on campus we hadn't managed to get into, and we realized this might be our only chance. As the man walked through the door he had just unlocked, we snuck up and wedged a large stick between the door and the frame. Once he disappeared from sight, we giddily slipped inside. The first thing we saw was a large dinosaur skeleton, probably a reproduction, but to us, it felt like we had it all to ourselves. We started walking down a dark hallway when my friend suddenly grabbed my wrist. I tried to swat her hand away before she whispered, "We have to leave now." I rolled my eyes and turned to see what she was looking at. There, in a brightly lit bathroom with the door wide open, stood a man, probably the same one who had just entered the building. He was completely naked, not even a sock on him, standing in front of the mirror with his bare back to us. I froze, staring in shock for what felt like an eternity. Then, suddenly, his eyes met mine in the mirror, and he grinned. Needless to say, we bolted out of there as fast as our legs could carry us. After that, we stopped exploring the university altogether. And I never told a soul what we had seen.
Next one.
I was at my great-grandparents' farm one day when I was 12, with my siblings and cousins, looking for trouble. Trouble came in the form of the odd building in front of the farmhouse. It was small, about 6 by 8 feet, but tall, nearly 2 stories high. From the outside, it looked dilapidated, rotten wood, holes, and cracks everywhere. No one knew what it was for. It had been there since before my great-great-grandparents had bought the land 70 to 100 years earlier, and according to my dad's uncle, no one had set foot inside for as long as he could remember. After a few minutes of daring each other, I volunteered to go in. The first odd thing I noticed was the grass outside. It was tall enough that I expected it to obscure a small door. Instead, what it hid was a 3-by-3-foot window frame. As I moved toward it, I realized I was sinking. The building sat on a steep hill, and the window towered above me. In front of it was a dense mass of shoots, each about half an inch thick. Not wanting to give up so soon, I climbed into the tangle, trying to use it like a bridge. The branches snapped under me, poking and scratching, and for a moment I was afraid I'd get stuck, or impaled. Somehow, I made it across and crawled inside. Inside, it was in better condition than I expected. The cracks in the walls let in plenty of light and fresh air, and only a little dust floated in the beams. The floor was surprisingly sturdy. What caught my eye was a long plank laid out like a staircase, leading to a platform that wrapped around the walls. The plank felt sturdy when I tested it, so I climbed up. Above, I could see more planks and platforms stacked like a strange network, all the way toward the ceiling, though my view was blocked by the fifth platform. The second level was similar, except for an ancient rubber duck sitting on the ledge. I thought it was cute, but left it alone. By the third level, my gut started telling me to leave. On the sturdy part of the platform lay a rubber mallet and an empty toolbox, both completely clear of dust. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself maybe my uncle had been working on it, even though I had no idea how he could have gotten in. Then I turned and froze. At the top of the next platform was a full-length rolling mirror. My dread spiked, but I crept closer. I used the mirror to look around without stepping too far onto the thin wood. The mirror itself was spotless. Next to it sat a trunk full of clothes, an old pink dress spilling out. I fought the strange impulse to try it on, then forced myself to keep moving. I hadn't climbed halfway up the next plank when panic hit me. That primal instinct you get when something is directly above you, about to drop on your head. I felt that. I knew something was up there. Without hesitation, I turned and bolted back down. The noise of my own footsteps, the clatter of the planks, and the pounding of my heart made it impossible to tell, but I was convinced I heard footsteps behind me. I started leaping straight from one platform to another. By the last plank, it was quieter. Either whoever, or whatever, was behind me had stopped, or I had calmed down just enough to think clearly. Still, I didn't slow down. As the window came into sight, I remembered the sharp sticks below. I made a split-second decision, crouched, and hurled myself out. I cleared the sticks, but hit the ground hard. It hurt, but I only ended up with bruises. I looked back, nothing came through the window. I was already scrambling up the hill before I was fully on my feet. At the top, my dad was waiting with my siblings and cousins, looking impressed. "Did you see that?" I shouted. "Yeah, that was a dramatic entrance, jumping out like that," he said casually. Chaos resumed as usual, but I managed to warn them not to go inside. They said they didn't want to anyway. Later, I told my dad the whole story. He insisted the place was haunted. Maybe he was teasing, maybe not. When I asked my uncle if he'd ever worked on the building, he flatly said no. I never spoke of it again.
Next one.
So my friends and I decided to check out this huge creepy house. There was a barn-like building in front of the house that you had to walk by before getting inside. When we first passed it, the barn's door was closed. We made our way into the house, and inside there were holes in the floor and trash everywhere from squatters. As we kept moving through, I found a pickaxe just lying on the ground. I picked it up, joking that if any ghosts tried to fight, I'd be ready. We eventually reached the stairs, but the entire flight was covered with nails sticking out of them. These weren't old, bent nails left over from planks being ripped off. These looked new and sharp, all deliberately pointing up. Suddenly, we heard a noise coming from the barn-like structure outside. Freaked out, we bolted for the exit. But when we got outside, the barn door that had been closed earlier was now wide open. It couldn't have been any of us, we had stuck together the whole time. The second we saw that, we ran even faster. Once we hit the street, We were still freaking out when we noticed a woman running toward us. Already on edge, we stopped, and she asked, "Were you guys in that house just now?" We didn't want to lie, so we said, "Yeah." She started repeating, oh my god, please, please stay out of the house." We asked her why, and she just stared at us blankly and said, "It's a very dangerous house. Stuff has happened in there." We pressed her for details, but all she said was, "I can't tell you. All I can say is, never go back in that house. Bad stuff will happen to you." That's when we really started panicking. She told us we needed to leave immediately, and right then, a loud noise came from inside the house. The second we heard it, we sprinted to my car and got the hell out of there. We've never gone back since. All I can say is, that was one goddamn creepy night.
Next one.
It's pretty chaotic, so I don't usually talk about it. But I swear on my life it happened. First off, there were no trespassing signs or any kind of warning anywhere, and I have no idea what the hell these guys were on. But here it goes. A long time ago, my sister, an ex-friend, and I decided to urbex and ghost hunt late at night in a graveyard after a trip out of town. We took a dirt road that led us deep into the woods until my ex-friend stopped at the cemetery, which sat on a small incline across the road from where we parked. We climbed up, shined our flashlights over the gravestones, and noticed that quite a few of them were kids. That's when my ex-friend pulled out her EVP device and started asking questions. For several minutes we didn't get anything, until we did. As I was looking around the graveyard, we suddenly heard static coming through, with what sounded like a faint voice behind it. We couldn't make out what it was saying. My sister started guessing, trying to figure out what the spirit was trying to communicate, when suddenly we heard the loud revving of an engine. Out of nowhere, this old pickup truck came tearing around the bend behind our Jeep. Shocked, we watched as it stopped at the end of the road. Another car passed between our vehicles, and the truck immediately took off after it. We thought it would just keep following that car, but instead, it screeched to a stop. Then, for some insane reason, the driver started reversing and driving forward again, back and forth, aggressively, right in front of the graveyard. At that point, we shut our flashlights off and dug behind tombstones to hide. Eventually, the truck moved forward, turned around using another driveway, and came back. We decided to leave the graveyard, but just as we started to move, the truck climbed the incline. We hit the ground again, hiding behind graves. That's when they turned their headlights off. A moment later, we heard a door open and slam shut. That was it. We decided to haul ass back to the Jeep. As soon as we jumped up, whoever was in the truck switched their high beams back on, blasting us in the light. The three of us booked it, tripping and bumping into gravestones as we sprinted toward the car. We could hear footsteps behind us, though nobody ever shouted or said a word. We jumped off the stone wall, scrambled into the Jeep, and as my ex-friend fumbled to start the engine, the truck backed down from the graveyard. In those terrifying few seconds, we felt the Jeep move slightly, like someone was pushing it from behind. My sister and I looked at each other in disbelief, both feeling it, when suddenly the engine roared to life. My ex-friend floored it, and we shot out of there. We had to turn around eventually, though, and when we did, we saw the truck sitting right at the bend in the road where it had first come from, its high beam still fixed on the graveyard. We yelled at my ex-friend to just gun it. She did, and we flew past the truck. But strangely, they didn't do anything. We kept driving way over the speed limit, terrified they were following us. Every set of headlights we saw made us panic, but eventually we realized they weren't behind us anymore. Finally, we calmed down and made it back to my ex-friend's house. Her dad was waiting on the porch when we got there. We jumped out, shaken, and told him everything. At first, he started joking about it, until my sister pointed at the back of the Jeep. We all turned to look. There were small handprints all over the back of the car.
Next one.
Me and two of my friends were checking out an old fort on the coast. Rumors said it was haunted, and people who went there supposedly always came back injured in some way. That drew us in. It was the middle of the day when we managed to climb into the place, but it was still unnervingly still and creepy. We decided to split up, clearly not learning from horror movies, and started looking around the courtyard and the battlements. I found the remnants of a fire. Among the ashes were what looked like burnt letters. I picked up some of the scraps and pieced them together. They revealed that the recipient of the letters had been released from prison for good behavior, but wasn't allowed to see his kids. The letters became increasingly urgent, demanding that he check in with the authorities. Then, separate from the fire, I found a handwritten letter pinned under a rock to keep it from blowing away. This one seemed to be from the man's ex, who refused to let him near his kids because what he had done was unforgivable. That's when I suddenly became aware that I was alone. My friends had ventured into the bowels of the fort, hollowed out tunnels in the cliffside. So, I followed into the pitch black, not knowing whether I'd run into one of my friends or some kind of psychopath. Eventually, I found one of them and explained what I had discovered. We jumped at every noise as we searched for the other, until finally we regrouped and bolted out of the fort. In the chaos of escaping, one friend broke 2 toes, the other dislocated his shoulder climbing out, and I ended up with a massive scar across my hip where I got cut open. Very creepy place.
Next one.
Me and a few friends decided to explore this abandoned children's hospital we'd heard about, located in a small village about an hour from us. When we got there, it was this huge plot of land, surrounded by trees, with the building in the center, real creepy looking. We had to climb a wall to get inside since we couldn't enter on the ground floor. The only way in was through a window that was slightly ajar. After climbing through, we found the place in ruins, rubble everywhere, but it also looked completely desolate, like no one had been inside for years. That night we basically went straight up to the roof, had a few beers, and then went home. A few days later, I decided to go back with my girlfriend to have a proper look around. The moment we stepped inside, the vibe was completely different from the first night. To get to the ground floor we had to jump over a broken staircase, right next to a large, heavy-duty wooden door with multiple bolts and chains across it. Not far from there, we found a trapdoor with a ladder leading down into the basement. I convinced my girlfriend to come with me, but she refused to go far. She stayed at the bottom of the ladder with her flashlight while I had a quick look around. That's when it got really scary. I walked past some old machines into a small room that was completely empty, except for a chair that had been knocked over and a noose hanging from a pipe directly above it. My blood ran cold. I immediately turned to leave, and that's when I saw it, red graffiti on the wall. I don't believe it was blood, it was too much, but it read, "Don't come back." Needless to say, I haven't been back since. Later, my girlfriend told me that while I was in the basement, she felt like I was gone for almost an hour, even though I was only down there 5 or 10 minutes. She also swore she heard whispers coming from the dark corridors. At one point, the trapdoor even slammed shut above her for no apparent reason. Very scary place. I'd love to go back with a bigger group someday, but damn, that messed me up.
Next one.
Exploring an abandoned winemaker's mansion in Portugal. Evacuated in a hurry around the 1930s 40s, unpaired ladies' shoes scattered everywhere, a naked baby doll wrapped in a rosary, secret passages stuffed with chairs, tried to appease demon baby, possibly picked up a curse or two. It's a beautiful, possibly 100-year-old villa on the banks of the Douro River. Crumbling hard, swallowed by vines and other vegetation, surrounded by palm trees, it's stunning. But man, did it raise some spooky questions. My boyfriend and I found it last year and spent a good chunk of the day exploring. We went back this summer, but by then the vines and wild grasses had really taken over. We almost couldn't even find it again. We had to wade through shoulder-high grass and ferns. It felt prehistoric. Before you even reached the house, you passed through heavy vegetation. The first sign of the mansion is a shaded cave, very Victorian-looking, with moss-covered carved stone benches and a natural spring at the back. Directly above the spring is a hole in the rock wall, leading into a passage just big enough for an adult to crouch down and crawl into the pitch black. If you stare into it long enough, you'd swear you see something moving inside. Further along, below the house, are more caves in the rock. The biggest one confirms they're a network of secret passages. Its entrance is stuffed with old chairs and a nightstand, maybe to keep tourists out, or to keep something in. When you finally get into the house, the first thing you'll notice are huge stone vats in the cellar, presumably for making wine, and hundreds of dusty, mostly unlabeled bottles scattered everywhere. You have to watch your step. We found the doll on the first floor. As you walk down the corridor, the first room to the left looks like someone tried to burn documents in a hurry. maybe 80 years ago. The floor is covered in random old shoes, mostly women's, none of them in pairs, mixed with charred pieces of paper. From what we could make out, the papers looked like official records from the 1920s. The floor there is incredibly unstable, you have to stick to the walls. Further down the corridor, there are more shoes and crates upon crates of empty wine bottles. Both the shoes and bottles look circa 1930s-40s. Then, the demon baby doll. In the doorway to what must have been a living room sat an old, naked baby doll, possibly missing an eye, covered in cobwebs, contorted in an unnatural position. My boyfriend and I decided to show it some kindness and put it inside a large wooden trunk in the corner. She seemed happier there. When we returned this summer, though, the doll was back in the middle of the room, sitting on a table, wrapped in a string of rosary beads. Yeah, the rest of the first floor was just rotting curtains and collapsing floors. But the attic, oh, the attic, was the real shocker. While exploring, we ran into an old man living next door. He said the place had been derelict as long as he'd been alive, 60 years. You'd believe it, except the attic told a different story. Unlike the rest of the house, which looked abandoned in the early 20th century, the attic had been lived in as recently as the 1990s or early 2000s. We found a child's bedroom painted red and green, with modern-looking furniture, school books from that time, collectible stickers from chewing gum packets, even color photos. In another part of the attic, the floor had caved in under a massive pile of rotting leather, fabric, and God knows what. That raised so many questions. Did a family secretly move in? If so, how did the neighbor never notice? Why only the attic? Why leave the rest of the house untouched? We had to leave quickly, the whole structure was dangerously unstable, and we could have dropped through the floor at any moment. We stuck to support beams and doorways to spread our weight. Of course, we took photos of everything. Of course, we plan to go back until the house is completely swallowed by the jungle around it. And of course, we wondered for weeks afterward if we'd picked up a curse in the process.
Next one.
Exploring Eloise Psychiatric Hospital in Michigan, and the surrounding mass grave sites, was absolutely terrifying. The campus, or what remains of it, 3 buildings, sits right next to a Michigan State Trooper HQ. Needless to say, it's a guaranteed ticket just to even attempt to enter any of the buildings, and it's patrolled constantly. In its prime, Eloise consisted of 78 buildings and 902 acres of land. It was utterly massive. All of the buildings were connected by a network of underground tunnels used for patient transport. The buildings themselves were pretty typical, at least compared to other facilities I've explored. The scariest part was wading through thigh-high water in parts of the flooded tunnels, and walking across a narrow I-beam on the roof to get to the best view. If I had fallen from that I-beam, I'd be dead. The floors all had a gap to allow space for the boiler room exhaust stack. To make matters worse, I've always had terrible vertigo, so crossing it was both a milestone and a serious risk. But all of the fear and anxiety brought on by exploring the buildings was utterly dwarfed by how horrifying the mass graves were. Especially one paranormal experience that happened to me and my friends. That's a whole story on its own. Most of the graves are marked only by tiny numbered stones, scattered across fairly unremarkable parts of the city. At one of the sites, an old tunnel had collapsed beneath it, creating deep craters and holes that dropped straight down into the water that used to flood the tunnels. Falling in meant you'd be trapped with no way out. We hadn't brought a rope, so rescue would have been impossible. The ground all over that field was loose, giving way under our steps. It felt like at any moment I could be swallowed up by the earth itself. Needless to say, I wanted to leave immediately, but thanks to peer pressure from one very brave friend, we stayed for a few hours. For locals curious about access, you can hop the fence from the nearby golf course, so entry isn't hard. But what disturbed me most was learning later that many of these mass graves have been paved over as parking lots or stores, something you can confirm by checking historical maps at City Hall or local libraries.
Next one.
A buddy of mine and I were exploring an old factory that had been shut down for poisoning the local water supply about 30 years earlier. The area was contaminated with lead, and the factory had been left mostly unchanged aside from some machinery being stripped out. Inside the maintenance/locker room area, there was a long hallway lined with doors to various rooms. It was pitch black inside, even in broad daylight. We navigated the corridors with flashlights. The air smelled of mold, cold and damp, yet the ground was dry and dusty. The lead paint was peeling from the ceiling in thick flakes, hanging down like feathers. Many had already fallen to the floor, and they crunched beneath our feet as we crept along. In one room, we noticed a sliver of light bleeding out of an old double door, spilling into the hallway. Naturally, this caught our attention, so we eased inside. The light turned out to be sunlight. The doors led outside. The room appeared to be a laundry room, probably used for uniforms. A massive dryer still sat there, and we joked that one of us could probably fit inside. Being teenagers, this was exactly the kind of dumb fun we couldn't resist. I volunteered, climbed in, and to my surprise the drum still spun freely. The bearings had held up through the decades. I braced myself and told my buddy to give me a push, wagering I could survive a few revolutions without issue. We spent a few minutes taking turns spinning around in the giant dryer, laughing at how ridiculous it was in such a creepy setting. When my turn came around again, I started rocking back and forth to gain momentum. Just as I looked to my buddy for the extra push, I realized he wasn't moving. His demeanor had changed instantly. He had gone pale, almost shaking, his eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. "Stop, stop," he whispered frantically. What's wrong?" I asked, climbing out. "Listen. Do you hear that?" We froze, holding our breath. From the pitch-black corridor came a sound we recognized all too well: crunch. 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 The distinct noise of the paint chips underfoot, only this time, it wasn't us. Someone, or something, was creeping slowly toward us through the darkness. We had explored every inch of the factory earlier and hadn't seen a single person, or even an animal. The footsteps didn't speed up or slow down, but they grew louder. Crunch. Crunch. We looked at each other in disbelief and terror. Who could it be? What could it be? Why would anyone sneak up on us in the middle of that echoing maze of hallways after all the noise we had been making? There was no time to figure it out. I turned toward the double doors where the sunlight seeped through and threw my shoulder into them. They groaned and rattled but didn't budge. My buddy rushed to help, and together we forced them until they finally started to give way. We kicked them for the final push, and they burst open. I had never been so happy to see sunlight, dead grass, and rusty fences in my life. We bolted, never looking back, never going back, and never knowing what it was that crept toward us in that wretched, dark corridor.
Next one.
Years ago, I tagged along with a few people to explore an abandoned mental ward in another state. We got a hotel room the night before and woke up crazy early so we could get in while it was still dark. The place was incredible: huge corridors, hundreds of rooms, and plenty of windows for sunlight to pour in. For once, there was almost no graffiti at all. It was a perfect spot for anyone who appreciates urban decay. I let the others do their thing, and I went off on my own to explore areas I wouldn't have seen if we had all stuck together. On the top floor, I was taking everything in when I looked out one of the large windows facing the inner courtyard. The hospital was built in a U-shape, with utility poles and a platform right outside, splitting out utilities to different sections of the campus. It took my brain a few long seconds to process what I was seeing. Hanging upside down from the platform, about 20 feet in the air, was a person, and they were dead. For what felt like several minutes, I stood frozen, trying to convince myself I wasn't dreaming. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called the others upstairs. We debated how to handle our exit and when to call the authorities. In the end, we decided to leave the building first and make the call once we were outside the perimeter. We didn't know our way around, though, and the door we exited led directly into the courtyard, forcing us to walk right beneath the body. Once outside, we called 911 and waited for the authorities to arrive. After giving statements, we headed home. A few days later, I saw a story in a local paper. It turned out the man had most likely been trying to steal copper wiring from the electrical platform and hadn't realized the rest of the campus grid was still active. He was upside down because he had strapped himself to the unit with gear he brought. The saddest part, at least in my observation, was that there were no cars anywhere near where he died. If you were stealing copper, you'd expect to park nearby since you'd be loaded down with equipment and cable. My guess, and I could easily be wrong, is that someone was with him, saw him die, then drove away without saying a word, leaving him there to save their own skin.
Next one.
My boyfriend and I used to work together at a bar in downtown San Francisco, right off 6th and Market. One night, he said he wanted to show me the basement. Now, in downtown San Francisco, there's a complex system of underground dwellings and corridors, as there is in many very old towns. You can find connections to the old sewer system in just about any neighborhood, which is impressive in itself, but in the downtown to North Beach area, there's an incredible network of underground tunnels that were supposedly built by the Japanese during internment, utilizing old speakeasies. This was one of those examples. The first level down was made up of apartments or tenements, obviously illegal dwellings, since we were already entirely underground. My boyfriend was already nervous and wanted to go back, but I wasn't about to quit. We kept going further down. This is where it got strange. We walked down a long flight of concrete steps into a huge underground room with very high ceilings. Remember, the floor above us was already completely underground, and here was this cavernous space beneath it. There were no railings, and against one wall were 4 old toilets in a row, surrounded by crumbled concrete. From this massive chamber, several other large rooms branched off, each big enough to hold over 100 people. Some were a step up, others a step down. At one point, I climbed a small flight of stairs and realized I could access the building next door, but instead I chose to keep going deeper. The next level felt like a mezzanine. The ceiling was very low, maybe 6 feet at most. Inside was an old pool table, overturned chairs, piles of stripper clothing, including a pair of 7-inch clear platform heels, and even a mattress. Things were starting to feel legitimately creepy. Clearly, people had lived, or still lived, down here. That's when I noticed something unsettling. A light bulb was on. I couldn't figure out how it had power, or how to turn it off. Stranger still, there weren't any cobwebs, no rats, no spiders, nothing you'd normally expect in a place like this. Then my boyfriend found another set of stairs leading even further down. At the bottom, we came across a strange walk-through closet with high shelves. Half joking, I told him, this would be an excellent place to hide a sex slave. That's when he froze. Oh fuck. We better get out of here. While I was still joking around in the closet, he had walked through to the other side. What he saw, and then what I saw, was disturbing. We had clearly reached the old sewer system. To our left was a massive, dried-up sewer entrance. In front of us was what looked like the foundation of a demolished building, a huge, expensive pit lined with spikes of rebar. On the other side of the pit were 3 old brick jail cells. Each had an arched brick entrance, iron bars, which had been pulled up, and inside, a small brick bench, a sink, and in one, a bucket. Next to the cells was a dark, yawning entrance to God knows where. And in the middle of the room, suspended above the pit, was a single red light bulb, glowing, bathing the entire scene in eerie crimson. I whispered, "Why is that light on?" My boyfriend muttered, "Whoever lives here must be home." That was it. We should leave. Yup. And we hightailed it out of there as fast as our legs could carry us. We never went back down there again.
Next one.
This story comes from Belgium and took place in 2020, during the confinements. I was 20 years old at the time. Because of the severity of the pandemic in Belgium, the law stated that you could only go out to practice sports or to work. I got into the habit of meeting with a friend, Sully, to go out for runs and practice different sports in general. Both of us were also fond of urban exploration and knew a spot on the outskirts of Brussels, an abandoned sports and wellness center where we often hung out after our runs. To get there, you had to slip through a hole in a fence, cross a small stretch of woods, and then you'd arrive at a football pitch and tennis courts. On the hill above stood the center itself, a 4-story building that took up an entire block. That day, we had just finished a 5 kilometers run and headed to our usual spot. It was about to rain, so we made our way toward the building. As we approached, we noticed 2 teenagers sitting on the edge of the roof. It bothered me because we had planned to go up there ourselves, so instead we went to wait in the hall area, hoping they would leave soon. From that hall, you could see directly into the kitchen, which you had to pass through to reach the roof. You could also see into a smaller hall and into the dining room. Sully was rolling a cigarette while I gathered 2 chairs and an office table for us to sit. That's when things turned unsettling. As I finished setting everything up, I suddenly felt unwell, like I was being watched, and not in a good way. When I looked toward the kitchen, I saw, for a brief moment, a head peeking out from the doorway, staring right at us. It was a man. He was filthy, so I couldn't tell his age, but I will never forget the look on his face. He had an exaggeratedly happy expression, like he had just found exactly what he was looking for. I froze. I couldn't react bravely, so I slowly leaned toward Sully, never breaking eye contact with the man, and told him very calmly that we had to leave immediately. I tend to joke around a lot, especially with Sully, but when he saw the look on my face, he didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his backpack and stood up. We bolted out to the football pitch. The two teenagers were still on the roof, so we shouted up, asking if the man was with them or if they had seen him. They said no, they hadn't seen anyone, and that they had come alone. Which meant if someone was there, he wasn't with them. We told them it was probably best if they left too, since we didn't know what the man in the lobby was up to. They said they'd be fine and would leave later. We decided not to push it. We had already warned them, and besides, we had been out long enough that it wasn't exactly legal under the confinement rules. As we headed back toward the woods, I turned around. For a split second, I thought I saw a silhouette standing at the staircase leading to the roof. My brain didn't fully register it. I just turned back and kept walking with my friend. I was so shocked, because nothing like that had ever happened to me before, that I chose not to tell anyone else out of fear they wouldn't believe me or would just make fun of me. Sully is the only other person who knows. He didn't see the man himself, but he was terrified just from seeing my reaction in that moment. I never found out what happened to those teenagers. I later came across some local articles from that period about teens being chased by a crazy man in an abandoned building, but there wasn't enough information to know for sure if it was the same place, or the same man.